This episode of the Better 2 podcast is brought to you by Kitty Mystic and DM Needham, author of My Days with the Dark Muse, as well as Love is Worth Waiting For. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest is Nick Jonsson. Nick has quite a story for us. He actually is the author of Executive Loneliness. And you might be wondering what that is. Well, we do talk about that in the steps to help executives get out of that. But it's not just about executives, because he has lived on seven continents. So he has had a varied journey. He also, when he moved to Singapore, he had some struggles that we discuss. And he ended up going into a very dark place and found comfort in alcohol. So we talk in depth about his crash and his comeback. So enjoy. Hi, Nick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
That's good. Where are you located currently?
I'm in Singapore and it's a beautiful morning here.
I thought you might be still in Singapore, but I wasn't positive because you have quite the little trajectory of the places you've lived.
Yes, I lived in 7 different countries. I was born in Sweden. Then I went to Australia to learn English. And then since then, I mainly lived in Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and then in Singapore.
Quite the journey. And, you know, as your story goes, you were actually, when you first moved to Singapore, you really didn't know anybody. So you were there by yourself. You had this awesome job. And suddenly, and I know I was in middle management and I understand the stress level about middle management. It's not the same as being an executive, but there is still a stress level. So you are in this position and it has to be kind of lonely if you don't know anybody. I mean, I've moved across country and that's not the same as moving across, the world. So there had to be a lot of stress for you just being in this position before we even get to the point of you losing your job.
Right. Yes, it can be quite lonely indeed when you move to a new city, as you say. Another country comes with more complexity. It's a different language, it's a different culture, different legal system. And when you come to a new country, you normally need to get your work permit and all the kind of documentation around that. And it's different in every country. So it can be a very stressful journey and it can be very lonely. And that's at least what I found myself in. And then, you're thrown into a job. You have new colleagues, new teammates, and they're talking in a different language around you. And you're not sure if they're talking about you or actually you can make up your own mind, right?
Right. I used to have a friend, her mother was Italian and her daughter spoke both languages. And, here we are, I'm visiting and all of a sudden mom breaks into Italian. And it's like, okay, so are they talking about me or what? You don't know. And it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but you have to pull it off that it doesn't matter. I got this. But in the back of your head, there has to be that little nugget of going, what do they say?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was a little bit easy when I moved to Singapore, though, because at least even though the Chinese is the main language here, the business language is English. So it is a little bit easier here. But that said, at that stage, I was quite sick when I moved to Singapore.
So how were you sick?
Well, in 2015, I went down a hill. Basically, you can say I felt isolated in my workplace. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I started to try to basically do more sports. Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry, Cammy. Sorry. Anyway. One of my neighbor's dogs is barking, so now she's got to answer the call back. I will edit all this out. Cammy, come here. Come here, babe. Sorry, you can go on.
That's all right. So basically in 2015, I started to isolate myself in the workplace. I had some challenges and I didn't realize at the time that I should really have needed to talk to someone about these issues. So I kept it basically for myself, trying to deal with it, which I think is quite common for senior executives that, when we have issues.
Well, even when for me in middle management, you have to keep things to yourself because management doesn't want to know that you're having problems. And it's just a certain level of stress that you're put under to perform. And nobody really recognizes that because they don't, I don't want to say they don't care, but you are being paid to not be emotional. You are paid to do your job. And we don't care how you get it done, just get it done.
Absolutely, and I was in a quite big role at that time. And we were managing 72 hospitals and clinics in Indonesia, and I was the deputy GM. So I was basically hired to go out and get the job done, while I had a very experienced senior GM behind, sitting looking at the administration, the documentation, and so on, and staying in the office. She had done her hard job being on the field, and I was paid, as she said, to go out and do this. It was just very, very challenging. And I wish I had opened up to someone before it was too late. I wish I had a proper mentor, perhaps a proper coach, someone by my side who I can talk to about it. Because, as you said, also you cannot go and tell your boss all the time that how you're feeling. Then they're gonna perhaps find you in another role, yeah, or you be let go. So I just kept that secret silent, and my way of dealing with it was through sport, trying to do a lot of exercise after work, or going to the bar, and that became sadly the norm. I rushed to the pub after work, had some drinks, just to be able to breathe out after stressful days at work. But in the end, after about a year having this pattern, I was so sick that I had to resign from the job, and I didn't know at that time what I should do. With this resignation also came other things. I divorced. And I wanted to move out of the country because I didn't feel at home in Indonesia, and suddenly I was quite lost.
Well, and the thing about, when you're losing your job and nobody looks at this, especially if it's something that you've done for maybe a few years, that job and those people have become, dare I say, part of your family. They are attached to that. It's part of your identity. And you have to then rediscover who you are. Because I identified so hard with my job in management that it was just like when I quit, it was like, okay, so who am I now? And I don't think that we really look at that anymore. I mean, it used to be, at least here in this country, that you would work until you retired and then you would have to figure out who you were. But now we don't do that. Now we move around and you put on different hats. But there's still that loss. We're losing, sometimes when you go to a new job, it's awesome. But if you're leaving a toxic work environment, the next steps you have to go, well, I don't want to be in this position again. I don't want to be, I don't want to be a low man on a totem pole and I don't want to be taken advantage of. So how do I make myself feel better? When I left my management job, I was pretty much worn down, and I didn't do alcohol. Um, and I ended up having some ice cream and playing a video game when I got home. That was my vice. And the thing about that is, nobody tells you about one key factor about stress. And you were talking in your thing, you talk about health issues. The fact is that if you stress yourself out so much, you start with adrenal fatigue, you start with thyroid issues, and those things will ultimately keep going because they don't test for enough of that. They just say, "Oh, you're okay. Just relax." But it does morph into something else.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. And again, these are topics that are so full of stigma that, I didn't dare to talk to anyone. And here I am as the deputy GM managing hospitals and clinics. I was surrounded by doctors day in, day out. We were providing healthcare services. And on the outside, I looked perfectly fine. I was fit. I'm doing exercise. If anything, perhaps they were a bit concerned that I was too healthy and fit.
Hmm.
They said, relax, relax. And that's why when I did go to the bar for a few drinks, I said, oh, good on you, Nick. You need to relax a little bit more. Don't take life too serious. But that was all that people saw. And of course, you live a selective life. And I say that it's almost like a smiling depression, as an executive or as in management, that you're putting on this smile, this facade, everything looks good. And on your social media, you can select which pictures to share, and no one really shares about the dark sides. And that's though what I realize when I'm looking back, that I should have spoken up. I should have dared to be more vulnerable. But we are in a society where this is not the norm.
No, and the fact is, you going to the bar and drinking, that is, I mean, especially here, it's like that is the pastime. It's like, oh, we're gonna go get drunk on Friday night. Oh, we're gonna go get okay, but guess what? You wake up the next day. So if something is really eating at you, it's still going to be there the next day. And we are very good at avoiding and creating, like you said, the facade. It's much easier to create a facade and show everybody this is who I am. This is how happy I am. When my spouse passed away, I started doing the podcast around the year mark of it and of his passing. And I remember doing a podcast on the anniversary date, and I was all smiles and everything else. And then I got off camera and I cried. And it was like, this is how we're taught, though. As children, we're taught, we don't want to hear your problems, we want you to just keep going. And so then it passes from school to work, and you just keep going, and you're never vulnerable and open about who you are and what you're going through.
Absolutely, and that's what I had also with me going. And in school, there's a lot of bullying, fighting going on, and yeah, you have to be quite strong, and you need to get back, otherwise, you people will eat you alive. And you grow up in this tough environment. At least I did, and yeah, you bring this into the workplace, and there it means that you need to elbow your way to the top because if you don't do that, someone else will push you down. And I mean, that's at least what I've seen in the countries I worked in. And again, also with the cultural differences, you come in as an expat because perhaps you have a different education, you have some international experience that they pay you to do that job, and you're supposed to have that expertise. So the pressure is even more on you. You are expected to do more. And this also means that perhaps the locals then are looking at you and knowing already that this guy has a higher salary than me, and of course they will be the jealousy will come into play, and that just makes the expat life even more challenging. And that's why I think from my case, it's highlighted, it's amplified, and that's why the crash that came also perhaps was very, very hard. And I'm glad that I'm sitting here today. I'm glad I survived this journey because I went quite deep. I hit rock bottom in 2018.
Well, and before we go into 2018, something you talked about, how people look at you. Well, you being a foreigner, they're going to look at you, and partially being you're being put on a pedestal because you came in, and and in this, and I'm speaking from the American culture, people look at people from overseas and go, well, you took my job. You and it's like, well, I was qualified. There was no reason for me. I had the same qualifications as you, but maybe I had a little bit more education. People don't look past that facade, that book cover. They look at what they feel their jealousy is. And the thing about that is, they will sit there and tell you, hi, you're great, I'm so glad you're here. And then, as we were discussing, most likely bad mouthing you behind your back, and you have no clue. So as we're progressing here, so in 2018 you hit rock bottom, and I mean, rock bottom is a very dark place depending on who you are. So how bad was it?
Well, so from 2015, 2016, 17, I was a bit lost. I didn't really know what was home, and I jumped from job to job. And again, alcohol became a bigger part of my life at that time. I stopped exercising. I gained a lot of weight. I didn't care about nutrition anymore. And it goes so slowly. You're putting on half a kilo, you don't really notice it. And before I know it, I gained 30 kilos, and with that, then I was not feeling well at all. My blood pressure and all the values, the blood tests were very bad. And then, yeah, in 2018, it went so bad that I was addicted to alcohol at this stage. I needed alcohol to calm my nerves. And it was very difficult for me in the end to even operate. And I had to even have, that awful drink in the morning to stabilize my nerves just to be able to get on with my day. And that was my rock bottom, and that's when I realized, if I don't do something now, I gonna die very, very soon.
So that was the turning moment, the turning point when you decided that I got to change my life. And when you decided, you went to AA. And what was it like the first time you decided to pursue this? I mean, did you just go in and just go gung ho, or was it one of those things where you stepped into this meeting and you're like, you listen to other people and you're like, maybe I'm not ready for this? Or were you just, I'm going to do this?
Well, the turning point then in 2018 was that I had met a lady that I married, and I decided to tell her how I felt. And she was quite shocked and surprised. She saw me as this jolly person who's having a lot of fun and doing well in his job. So she was quite shocked and surprised, but she immediately decided to be there for me. She listened with empathy, and I started to feel better then. And she said, well, we got to sort this out. And if you have a drinking problem, yes, I know, you're drinking a bit too much, but it's not that bad, is it? Well, then I told her that, yeah, I'm drinking when you don't see it. Also, I've been hiding it and so on. And she said, well, we got to sort this out. And then we realized that we had a common friend indeed who had some alcohol issues earlier, and she had got support. So we walked over to her and listened to her, uh, and she was the one to take me to this beautiful fellowship of the anonymous alcoholics. Yes, so that's where how I came there. She introduced me, and in there there was support, and I felt the sympathy from people who've had these issues before.
And that's an amazing thing. There's so many people that they don't have that support. I mean, that's the biggest problem with our society is some places you can find support and other places you can't because somebody is going to ostracize. And people, I don't know how much you know about TikTok, but I mean, I don't go on TikTok very often, but I watch people sit there and pour their heart out and somebody blasts them. And it's like they're going through something and you don't realize it. And I mean, how many times have you heard a story where somebody's like, they bullied somebody into committing suicide? And it's like, what did you gain from this?
Mm.
Why is it rewarded to be bad and
Yeah.
push somebody to this? I mean, supporting each other, whether it be at AA or through another organization, it's a gift. It is a gift to be able to give somebody support. I went through my husband's death during 2020. Therefore, there was no real support. There was no funeral. There was nothing. There was nothing so I had to find my way through that by myself. So it was a much different experience dealing with grief that way than what you would normally expect. And I'm sure a lot of people went online for their meetings and whatnot during COVID.
Yeah, first, I'm so sorry for your loss
It's okay.
and during those challenging times, indeed. Um, I would say that there's so many of these anonymous organizations now. There's codependent anonymous. There's
Hmm.
for eating. There's for drugs. It's all kind of anonymous organization, and the most of them you will find if you go on Google. They are everywhere, and indeed, as you say, with COVID, a lot went online. Um and most of them, I would say 99% of these meetings, people are really respecting each other. They're respecting the anonymity, and it's a wonderful experience to come into these meetings and sharing your issues or challenges, whatever it is. Of course, and now as we're coming out of the pandemic, the best is if you can find something in your hometown, especially in the US. There's so many of these groups and meetings everywhere. At least people will, immediately take you and hold their arm around you and take you through it. And it doesn't cost anything. It's voluntarily if you want to give a small donation of $1 or two. So the money shouldn't be an issue, and everyone is there with the intention of helping others. And that's how I live my life now, even though I'm on my fifth year in recovery. Most days I'm back there as a volunteer supporting the network and helping newcomers who are coming in.
Did you did you actually see, besides the AA, did you actually go to a therapist or anything else? Did you seek out other help or did you just go to AA?
I started also at that time to see doctors. I did blood tests and so on, and I wanted to get well. I also saw therapists, and especially later on, as I decided to really help others, I shared in a radio interview what I did, the steps I took, and that was part of it. Also talking to a therapist, indeed, yeah.
Well, I think that's the thing, especially here. I don't know about over there, but here a lot of people, instead of just like alcohol, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with pharmaceuticals, but they go to the doctor to they ask for a prescription because they have anxiety or they have depression. And while that may be needed, and I'm not saying it's not, are you really digging at the root of the problem, or are you just going to just keep glossing over it? I mean, it takes a lot to be able to face what's going on. So I applaud you for actually being willing to take the challenge and to dig deep because it's hard. It's hard. I mean, that was the one saving grace besides my friends when my husband passed was that I had a therapist. And you're able to talk to somebody without judgment. And that's the same thing with those meetings. You're able to speak your truth without being judged. And that makes a world of difference for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's you said it that it's important to speak to someone who don't judge you. And if we're looking into our friendships, and if I'm thinking back, I had some wonderful friendships in my life, but we perhaps watched sport together, perhaps we played a game of golf together. you know that's typical men, isn't it? We meet up and we have a great time. We went to the bar and we were sharing, but we didn't talk about what was really on our mind, the deep, deep challenges, the dark sides. We didn't share, and perhaps women have a few close friends who they will open up with, but do we dare to? So that's the whole point here: going to these anonymous organizations, seeing a therapist or a coach or someone who is promising and who is confidential and anonymous. That's where you can feel safe and open up. And I would say half of the problem is solved by just sharing it, just speaking up, because the solutions will come to you when you just start speaking.
Well, and that goes back to the difference between men and women a little bit is,
Mm.
they say toxic masculinity. Well, we're not even going to label it that. It's just the fact that they have the pressure of, you're not supposed to share. You're not supposed to open up. You're not supposed to be vulnerable. We want a big, old, strong man. Well, the thing is, if something is eating at you guys and you are not talking about it, it's going to affect you. I mean, I look at my dad. My dad, he doesn't drink anymore. He never went to AA, but my dad's garage, he was a retired fireman. So he saw a lot of death and destruction as a fireman. But his garage, because he would work 24 on and then 48 hours off. That's how the fireman would do it. And so his garage, eventually, after he retired from the fire department, became Don's Garage and Social Club. And he's in New Orleans. So social club meant the customers would pick up their cars and then bring him booze besides pay for the thing. So he was always, I like to nickname him Good Time Donnie, because that's what his cycle was. And he told me not too long ago, he's like, well, I wouldn't change anything about my life. And I'm just like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, you were a functioning alcoholic at one point. But, and then my stepmom's like, well, he wasn't an alcoholic because he could stop. If he still had to do the same cycle all the time, at a certain point, you're still an alcoholic if it is a crutch for you. Even though it may not be as bad as it was for you, he still
Mm.
relied on it heavily. I mean, the man was always drinking after work.
Yeah, and that's the dangers. If you are at that stage, and then perhaps some life events happen, or maybe you get a chronic illness or something goes against you, then it's a fine line where how this can tip over, and then before you know it, you are in this place, the dark place that I was, when you can no longer live with alcohol and you cannot live without it, and that's where that's really where I found rock bottom.
Let me ask you this: when you were in that rock bottom place, did you have any thoughts of ending it all?
I didn't, but I thought I was going to die. I was pretty sure I was going to die because I was so sick. I wrote my will, I wrote my testament, and I remember sending all this documentation to my ex-wife, and I sent it to my parents. And I also signed up for life insurance because I was sure it was going to end. I just didn't have any way out of it. And you could almost say that it is a form of suicide when you have the insanity, when you just keep drinking when you know that it's killing you. So depending how you see it.
I totally agree, because at a certain point, my dad had gone sober, and then when my mom died, they were divorced a long time. He started drinking again, and I'm like, okay, so do you have a death wish? Is that what the? I mean, I couldn't ask him that because he's my dad. But in my 30s, I'm sitting there thinking, well, do you have a death wish? Because the way you drink, and after my stepmom died in his arms. He was drinking a case of beer a day. And it's like, how do you say you're not, you don't have a problem when you're doing this? So for him, he ultimately, the reason why he quit drinking was he got up one morning, went down a block to the coffee shop, and had a massive heart attack and a stroke.
Oh,
And his life was forever changed after that. Now, was it because of drinking? I don't know. But his life was ever he recovered from the stroke. He can't hear now, and his heart's fine. But it was a life altering event. And that's the thing. You was that his rock bottom because he kept pushing. And the thing is, people don't realize, they just keep going because they're like, I can do this. And you have to come to that wake up moment. And I know that you had a friend, and suicide I can talk about because my mother actually committed suicide. You had a friend that there was no signs. And the thing is, with my mom, I knew that she was suicidal. My stepfather knew, my grandmother knew, and I did a whole podcast on it. So I'm not going to go too far in. But her close friends did not know. Her close friends had no clue. And we tried to get her help. And suicide is a very tricky thing to talk about because there's a lot of guilt at first. For me, there was a lot of guilt when she died, even though I tried everything I could to stop it or stop her from doing it. But it became very clear before she did it, I was in a group, back to groups, um, for the loss of a loved one. And it was to try to navigate my stepkids from losing their mom. And there was a couple in there that lost their teenage daughter. And they kept saying over and over again that she kept trying to do it. She kept trying to kill herself. And so how they said it, she didn't commit suicide. She completed suicide because she had been on a mission. And when they said that, it would eventually that would really resonate with me because of my mom, because she had tried it so many times. But only certain people know the truth about it. That's the interesting thing, because you said you didn't see any signs. And it goes back to that mask, that facade that people put on, that, oh, everything's fine, I'm 100% okay. And it's just like, nobody really sits there when somebody says I'm fine. They don't usually go, are you sure? They just take the I'm fine and then go on.
Yes, and I'm very sorry to hear about your mom as well. And indeed, in the case of my friend then who died of suicide in 2019, I didn't know, and his family, his brother didn't know, his friends didn't know. We didn't expect it, and yeah, indeed, he had to paint this facade. He worked in the HR space as a consultant, and he had clients, and he needed to look good. Otherwise, would someone trust him with a business? No. So he had to look good. He had to look strong. And this particular year in 2019, from the outside, it looked like he was living the dream life. You know, he had been to the Mount Everest base camp to fulfill his dream of walking up there. He trained for a year for it. He was in the best shape of his life. He had a girlfriend he loved for, and he made a post on Facebook just before it happened, saying that he never been happier. So on the outside, we just thought
Wow.
that everything was wonderful. Um, but when he passed away so sadly, so quickly, I was in recovery. I was about 1 year into my own recovery, and I was feeling great. I was really coming through well. I was 1 year without alcohol. I had lost the about 20 of the 30 kilos I had gained, and everything was going well for me again. My new marriage was wonderful. We were supporting each other. And that's when I realized, oh my God, with my recovery, I've been so lucky here. I'm so blessed to have found this. And I didn't tell anyone yet. It was secret, basically. It was between my wife, myself, my parents knew, and a few close friends knew that something had happened to me because they could see I lost weight. They could see I was
Mm-hmm.
happier, but I didn't share anything. I kept it all secret to the anonymous groups. And that's when I decided to share it with the world. And went live on radio on an interview and I spoke about this. And since that, my life has changed forever.
I'm sorry about your friend. I am. And it's not an easy thing. And the fact that you did this, I don't want to say in secret, but in secret, sometimes we only tell the people that we really care about what's going on, because you don't know who to trust sometimes. It goes back to that issue. And you don't want somebody that's going to undermine your recovery just because, well, let's see if we can make him slip, I mean, and I know people are going to be like, well, nobody would do that. There are people that would play games like that, unfortunately. I'm not one of them, but I have been aware and made aware of people that don't always have your best interest at heart. So now that you're 5 years out, you've been a sponsor, I take it too, for other people that are in recovery. So, and you've written a book called Executive Loneliness. So, besides public speaking and your book, are you still functioning in the day-to-day rat race, or are you just now doing what you do to help other people?
Well, a big part of me is helping other people in the anonymous group and support groups and so on. And through the book I wrote, also I'm passionate about supporting and guiding people who are lost and help them find a way. But for work, I left. the rat race, you can say. I now work for a company that do confidential peer groups for senior executives. So it's not only about it's not about addiction, it's not about that stage, but it's about sort of coaching, mentoring each other. So in Singapore, for example, we have 750 members, and they are then in smaller groups, and we provide facilitators. So the point here is that the members come in and share the work-related challenges, the issues that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, and that they can get support from others. So it's about practicing this of becoming vulnerable and sharing your challenges. So hopefully we can tackle it before it becomes loneliness.
And it's a big, I don't want to say it's a crisis, but there's a lot of people that, whether it's, executives or middle management, you are not given those skills. You're promoted usually from below, and you move up, and you're not taught. All of a sudden, the people that you may have had a relationship with, such as friends, well, now you're their superior. So you have to put that wall up and change the dynamic. And nobody tells you how lonely that's going to become. You can't suddenly go to lunch with these people because, well, you're management now. So
Absolutely.
you start putting walls up, and you have to learn how to cope with those things. So beside your book, and we're going to talk about your book, you also, you actually went back to exercising, and you are a triathlon person, correct?
Yes, I love that. I love to exercise, and I love to do it now when I'm not drinking, because before it used to be okay, I'm going to do all this exercise and then I will compete in a race. Then I didn't drink for, let's say, 2, 3 weeks leading up to the race. But then after, of course, I would drink excessively, at least for a week, excessively. And I'm so happy that I don't have this controlling and on and off with the drinking. And it's not on my mind anymore to drink. So I can relax, I can exercise. And the reason I do triathlon is because it's just running is too hard on the body. But when you do triathlon, it's a bit of swimming, it's cycling, and it's running. And I do about half of this in different groups. So I join like a swim academy. I have a cycling group, a running group, and I try to do it even with people in recovery. We have cycling group for some people in recovery. We have some running groups. And by doing that, it's a bit of social gatherings together. And then also I do some of it by myself, and that's my own time, my me time. So I find it a good complement to my recovery and my work.
Nice. Now, I want to jump back for a second because this came to me. When you were growing up, did you see your parents or peer figures or mentors drinking? Was alcohol a big prevalent part of your life as a kid?
So my parents are normal social drinkers, and everyone else in my family are normal social drinkers. But growing up in Sweden, that means quite a lot of drinking. I mean, drinking around Christmas, Easter, and all the holidays and so on. It will be normal that there will be alcohol served at the dinner table. And you didn't really reflect on it. It was as normal as someone has a mug of coffee.
Hmm. Well, that's New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans, and New Orleans is party city. So, alcohol is always around. Whatever time, whatever space, it's there, and it's known as a part. I mean, I remember when I moved up to Shreveport, people were like, "Oh, you're from New Orleans. You must know how to party." And I'm like, because see, for me, I watched my grandfather drink, my mom's dad, and then watch my dad drink. And for me, seeing them act out of control, that kind of, I don't know, it was like when they gave me a drink, I guess when I was like 12 or 13, and I didn't like the taste. I didn't like, and I remember the smell from them getting drunk and stuff. And I think those things, it's not that I've never had a drink, and if I have a drink once a year, then that's a big deal. But I think because I was predisposed to watching that and smelling it, and immediately my mind's like, you don't like this. So unless it's really masked with fruit or whatever, I don't like it. And so therefore, for me, I pushed it away. Now my half sister, when she was 2, they gave her beer, which isn't really good. Um, but she, at 15, 16 years old, she wanted wine coolers. She wanted to drink. She wanted to party, even though her mother was a hardcore alcoholic. So the fact is that you can, when you see that in your life, that's why I asked. When you see that in your life, you're either going to go one way or you're going to go the other. But for you, it wasn't enough to make you pull back or dive headlong in. I wouldn't say that that was an attributing factor to you diving in. It was more the escape factor that you needed.
Yeah, it looked very normal to me. It looks like the adult thing to be, and I was looking forward to when I also was at that age, so I also could drink. And indeed, growing up, it was about partying, and it was normal on Friday, Saturday. But it was not the question. That's what you did, and that's what people did, and therefore, yeah, if something is so normal, then you don't question it, and you do it as well because you want to fit in.
Exactly. And I think that's a huge problem for most of us growing up. It's like, this is the norm. You're supposed to fit in. Here's the cookie cutter. Now fit right on in. And if you don't, well, we're going to ostracize you. So, yeah, I mean, I remember those things. It's like, okay, so senior party. Okay, I'll get drunk like everybody else did because that's what everybody else is doing. So I better do it too. And I mean, it's not that I always gave in, but there were times when you gave in to peer pressure because, well, it's the thing to do. So
Yes.
let's talk about your book. You have 5 key principles in your book to help executives.
Yes, if you want, we can talk through the five of them
I
because they
have the
helped me.
list right here, so sure, let's go.
All right. So the
So
first one is taking stock. So, and that's what I realized, when I look back at my recovery, the first was almost like if you think of a shop, you would perhaps do a stock take once a quarter or once a year. You look at your inventory and so on. We should need to do that as humans beings as well. You can do it on a paper or a spreadsheet where you're writing down the things that are perhaps not right. In my case, I had gained 30 kilos. I was drinking too much. I had stopped exercising. I needed a morning drink. I had thoughts of resigning from work. I wanted to, and I had just the divorce from my wife. All these things and the people that I had resentments about and so on. I had to make a list of that. That was my inventory when I started this journey.
okay, so you take your stock, and then you're going to ask for help. And that had to be
Yes.
asking for help is something that pulls a lot of us out of our comfort zone because I'm sure you've had, I know I've had parents or a statement from my mom or my dad that, well, you didn't do it right. I'm going to do it myself. So you kind of learn not to ask for help because you're not going to get it or you're going to be chastised. So, how hard was it for you to ask for help then?
Well, it was taking that list, and thinking of every line. Who can I ask for help here? Many times it can be friends, it can be anonymous organizations, charities, or doctors. So in the case of my health, it was a doctor. In the case of the alcohol, it was the anonymous alcoholics. Yeah, and then for other things, it was other people. So just looking at that list and getting started on it and ticking it off. Once you have a list in front of you with 20, 30 things, it's easier to get going and ticking those boxes, do one a day or whatever it takes. So the hardest was to get started. That's why I was unwell. That's why I hit rock bottom, and it took me 3 years going down there. But coming back was very quickly. Once I started ticking those boxes off the list, things came back so fast, and it gave me so much positive energy.
Well, that's the thing. We don't, when you're in that moment of rock bottom, there's 2 options. You can continue down that spiral, or you can say, okay, you know what? I'm going to change my life. You have to do it. And it wasn't so much a list, but I was heavier than I am now when I was married. And when my husband died, it's like, okay, you can do this. You can do this 2 ways. You can decide to eat your grief because since I didn't drink, this would be my go-to. I can decide to eat my grief or I can decide to get healthy. And I opted to get healthy because it wasn't going to do me any good to sit there and indulge my grief. It wasn't going to
Yeah.
make me feel better. And if it did make me feel better, it was only temporary.
Mm.
So I think getting healthy is always a good step. After you ask for help, you start getting healthy, and that's gonna make you stronger and happier.
Absolutely. That was my focus. And I also saw a fitness coach then. He set up some easy goals for me. I said, I don't like to be in a gym. I don't fancy that. But there's so many apps now which you can do exercise goals. He set up easy goals. First, it was just 3 kilometer walk a day, then increased to five. After a month, it was a short jog. And, once you have someone accountable and in an app, then, and you just complete it. And then you get, some music played and you get this trophy or you achieved your goal. You have a good feeling about yourself, And then I scaled myself. I could start seeing the pattern of dropping the weight, and all these things accumulate, and you start getting some confidence in yourself. So yeah, getting healthy both physically and mentally. Then within 3 months, I was really in a good place there.
Now, here comes the real trick: nurturing healthy relationships. Because how do you look at your relationships and decide, well, you know what, this relationship, even though I've known them forever, is toxic? How do you navigate that?
Well, it's about cleaning your side of the street here and making again on that list, the people you put down where you had damaging relationships. And it's about going back to them and making amends because probably if you have, if you feel isolated or even in my case, been unwell, you probably treated some people not in the right place because you have not been able to be a nice person. And I can just give you one example of one person I had on the list, and that was my sister. And we had faded away from each other. The relationship had almost died out. And it was one particular incident a few years earlier when we had a dinner with a family, and she gave a Coca Cola to my son, who was about 3 years of age at that time. And he had never had a soda in his life. And I was trying to avoid giving him sugar and especially soda and a Coke. He drank it before I realized it. And I didn't want to make a big scene about it at the table, but I wasn't also able, because I was sick at the time, to talk about it. So the only way I could do was pull him off the table, pull my ex-wife off the table, and storm off. And then I didn't answer her calls or messages for a year or 2 years, and that was my way of dealing with this. And when I later on, so this was about 5 years after the incident, came back to her to make amends. Uh, she didn't even understand and realize what was the reason for me having stormed off, and she couldn't even remember this particular incident in itself. She was just wondering whatever happened to me and why I was not, in touch. So for her, this was not a big thing, and but it just shows that the relationship was repaired instantly, uh, just because I was able to yeah, talk to her as a human being again.
Well, and I think that's a lot of the times that as humans, we don't always know how to interact. And sometimes somebody will say something and we will take it the wrong way, or we think they took it the wrong way. And then there's this parting of the ways of the friendship. And it's like nothing is ever discussed. We're done. I'm out of here. And that's fine if you've had problems with this person several times over. But when you do it so rash, like you were describing, there's a lot of unanswered questions on both sides, because it's like I'm sure you sat there once you got healthy and said, okay, why did I really do this? I know why I did it, but why didn't I just openly have this dialogue with her instead of acting so rash, you
Yes,
know?
exactly. I mean, why couldn't I just say, sorry, but he shouldn't really have a Coca-Cola. Please, next time, just give him a water. That would be the normal thing. I mean, the damage was already done. He's drank it. It is what it is, right? But that's not how I functioned at the time. And I try to function as much as I can now like that. But of course, sometimes we also feel overwhelmed when we lose it and we don't have that space in our brain to slow down and think about the situation.
Well, and whether it's recovery from alcoholism or recovery from anything that we've gone through, trauma, any kind of trauma, we can be doing fine, but there will be something that can trigger us to revisit that trauma, and we will be put right back into that mindset. I remember I was talking to my dad. I was 40, and I was talking to my dad, and my husband was there with us. And my husband was amazed because we started talking about my mom, and my dad just went, he just started getting all puffed up and everything else. And my husband said, I watched you go from 40 to being a 9-year old. He's like, your whole demeanor, your body language, everything changed as he morphed into that. And that's the thing I don't think we realize, when somebody, even if they're not that person, they can trip that trigger, and you're like, and you have to have the headspace to be able to unpack that. And if you're in a turmoil cycle, you can't necessarily unpack that at that moment. And that's why, hence, you would grab the kid and let's go, we're out of here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, we're not trained as kids or in school how to deal with these situations. It's only now in recovery I learned to meditate and I learned, a gratitude list and to find this space and walking in nature or whatever works for you. and we're getting better at it. But do we have to become, alcoholics and hit rock bottom to learn these basic things?
No, and that's the thing. I think, education is very important. I think education is a wonderful thing, and yes, we need to learn the classics, and we need to know how to read and math and all the stuff. However, would it be nice if we actually taught kids gratitude and we taught them how to meditate and we taught them how to get along? I had a discussion with my uncle. He was not very pleased with me because I said they should teach gardening in school because gardening, not only is it teaching you how to grow food, it can be very zen like at times. So, and he's like, no, that's the parents' job. And I'm thinking, but parents don't really have that time anymore to do that. So, wouldn't it be better, besides showing us all the things we need to do to get a job, wouldn't it be nice to show us what we need to live? And also taking care of the financial end of it, showing us how to be responsible with money, showing us these things that are going to make us, dare I say, a well rounded human, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, if,
absolutely. That's a big part of life. I mean, life is not only work. We train, as you say, rightly so, in school is it 95 or 99% about how to be good at work, but what about the other part of life? And that's definitely my parents didn't have the time to train me. I learned it the hard way, and it's been painful.
well, and when you think about the fact that there's so many teenagers. I had a guest on the podcast who's from Australia who had, I think he was 12, he wanted the perfect Facebook picture. By 14, after he got the picture and it wasn't the outside validation he needed, he took a flying leap off the building. And now he's paralyzed from the waist down. He's actually getting some movement back. But the whole point is, had he had better coping skills and learned those coping skills through school, or we wouldn't be having the suicide attempts and the suicides at school, but we put the kids under so much pressure now to not only perform, but to look good, look a certain way. And I mean, we have all these facades that are put in place. And if nobody's navigating this with a kid, how are they going to know which way to go?
Yeah,
If they're not adequate enough, oh, wait, the Kardashians, look, I should look like that. They don't even look like that in reality. Or excuse me, they didn't look like that in reality. But they had enhancement, and I'm not saying that enhancement's wrong. If that's your thing, that's fine. But we are sold, and this goes back to even me being a teenager. We're sold in magazines. You need to look like this, and if you don't, nobody's going to want you.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the with social media, that's it's a downward spiral of people being addicted to social media. And how do we break that then? Well, it's perhaps linked to the fifth and the next step in my book.
And that is finding your purpose.
Yes, indeed. And that's something also which perhaps school was trying to show me the way. Perhaps my parents, they took me to church as a child and so on a few times, but it was nothing really that clicked with me. And I didn't think much about that. And growing up my career, it was all about me getting a job. I had to fight for myself and so on. I was very little room to think about, was it something perhaps bigger in the universe than myself? And it came also through my recovery and through the anonymous support meetings then that we should look outside ourselves. We should start being of service to other people, and we should realize that we're not the center of the universe, and accepting perhaps that there's something bigger out there. And that was a big part of my recovery journey, and that's where I find myself now.
Well, and you touch on something very, very, very important because, and it goes back to social media. I was, I upload a daily video for TikTok because I do tarot readings. I'm not on camera, it's just my hands. And I have to sit there, unfortunately, while it's loading and TikTok is there. And I look at this and I'm like, everybody is trying to be somebody. It's the Andy Warhol 15-minute thing. But it's like, at what point everybody's screaming, oh, well, that person's a narcissist. Oh, that person's a narcissist. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm looking through TikTok, I'm like, but we're creating a whole bunch of narcissists because isn't social media basically, look at me? Hi. I mean, and I know I can get yelled at because of that, but isn't that the case though? Isn't social media just making everybody go, look at me? And sometimes you have good information, but most of the time it's just look at my makeup, look at this, look at So at what point are you finding your purpose by being on here? Or are you just wanting people to give you likes? And this is the whole head trip with you're competing with a computer algorithm that can quash your video. So one minute you may have a million hits, not me, and I don't want them, but one minute you'll have a million hits and the next minute you have 200. And I have a friend whose daughter or daughter's friend who was all excited because she had like 200,000 hits one day because of an outfit she wore. And then the next day she had 30 and she was depressed. But it goes back to if you're looking, look at me, I'm the universe and I'm not getting my needs met because nobody's paying attention to me, then you're not doing your purpose and you're looking for that outside gratitude.
Yeah, you're looking for that short, fast gratification rather than the sustainable long term one. And that only comes from being of service and helping other people and not looking at ourselves. So, indeed, social media is doing the opposite for finding ourselves, our purpose, and making real happiness for ourselves. Um, I have one social media post which done wonderful for me, and that was indeed the day after my friend's suicide. I decided to make a LinkedIn post, and LinkedIn, of course, is for the business community. But I made a video of myself, and I set up a charity fund to raise money and awareness of suicide prevention. Then, and that post went viral, and that's why I was on radio the next day. That's why I had so much media exposure, and that started the whole journey of writing the book. So I'm grateful for that post. But that's the only post I can remember where it was not about me at all. It was about the charity. It was about awareness for a good cause. And I'm glad that that one went viral rather than something else.
Well, and see that right there, that shows you're doing your purpose. You're trying to help others. You're trying to resonate with other people that may have either thought about it or their family member went through it or something else. That is a post with a purpose. But I'm gonna go back years because it's the only thing that came to mind. Like the woman putting on a Chewbacca mask that she got at the store going viral. While it's funny and she got all this notoriety, what do you do after you have this notoriety? And then all of a sudden you don't. And you're not you don't have a cause because you have a cause, but you have no cause. So what head trip because you got invited on talk shows and everything else. What head trip do you have now that you went back to normal life? You know, and nobody looks at that. You know, the I want something viral. Do you really? Because I had a friend who's an artist who George Takei gave her a shout out and her business blew up. And ultimately what happened was she had to shut her business down for a while and recover because she was so worn out. And nobody thinks about those spikes. Nobody and that and if you're not in a good mental place, it's either going to wipe you out or it could lead to drinking or something else. So
Absolutely.
are we creating another beast with social media?
Yes, I think we are. And a big part of recovery, and when we talk about in the rooms, is indeed that not have any spikes in your life. You need to not get overly excited about things and also not too depressed about things. It's about trying to find a normal life and being there in the middle because that's where perhaps something that is sustainable. And it's the same if someone win $1 million on the lottery. How many times does that end up well? It's
Yeah.
mainly sad stories you hear about it.
How hard is it now? I mean, you're 5 years in. How hard is it now to be around alcohol or people that drink?
I don't have a problem being around people with alcohol. I don't necessarily look for nightclubs and parties now. I changed my social scene and I rather go out for a walk in the morning and so on, rather than being out at night. It probably comes by age as well, so it makes it a bit easier. Uh, so it's not that hard. What I do find hard is still being around food and sugar. I'm struggling with that. I'm working hard on it. And if I have candy in the house, it will be eaten. So I find that that is where I'm now trying to choose healthier food and working on the diet as well.
I mean, that's an addiction that nobody talks about is the sugar addiction because there's sugar in everything and we don't talk about it. And now they've changed it from sugar to well, they've relabeled it, but high fructose corn syrup. But we've relabeled it now to something else. I don't remember what, but it's still the same thing. But now that we've relabeled it, it's healthier. No, it's not. But you know, we're just going to keep playing the game.
Yeah, we need to talk about that. That should be up next. I mean, we got rid of smoking used to be popular and the hip in the 80s. Now people are looking at smoking. Oh, why did we do that? That's not really healthy, is it? And I expect and I hope and I will support the movement that we need to get rid of corn syrup or sugar or whatever it is and try to be a little bit healthier. And it starts with advertising, marketing, and again the social norms need to change around it.
Oh yeah. And speaking of smoking, I worked in an office in the 80s, and you would get off on the sixth floor elevator as soon as the doors open. Now, every office was closed up and the hallway was just smoke. I mean, it was literally smoke. It was like, so I was in male file at the time, and there was a woman that I worked with who had been in the hospital. Okay. She had been in the hospital the weekend before. She has now got a nebulizer machine at her desk. She takes her nebulizer treatment, puts it down, and then lights up a cigarette. And I'm like, why were you in the hospital? Oh, because my asthma was acting up.
Oh.
Oh, okay. But
Oh
at the
dear.
same, this is the mindset, because we also had a girl that was pregnant, and she's like, they're like, well, you really should stop smoking. She goes, oh, why? The baby's going to get used to it. It's going to have to get used to it. And I'm like,
Oh dear.
yeah, I just, and I remember the HR people, because I was having bad problems because of the smoke. And they're like, well, we're not going to make it a smoke free environment. So you're just going to have to deal. And I'm thinking to myself now, it's like, I wonder what that man said when the mandate came out, and no more smoke.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, things have
There we
changed
go.
a lot.
Yes, let's hope that we can change the diet and nutrition around it to make it easier to choose healthy alternatives. And by the way, since I'm from Sweden, I realized that in Norway, the neighboring country, they have a sugar tax similar like all alcohol tax. So a drink with the more alcohol inside a percentage, the higher the cost, and the same is for sugar. And or we should have that for sugar and corn syrup. I think that may make an impact.
They tried doing that in a couple of states in the United States, and it didn't pass.
Oh,
People balked because they don't want to pay the extra money. They don't want to pay the extra tax for it because, well, I want my soda. I want my cheap fix.
uh-huh. There you go.
So, all your information, including your book and everything, will be in the show notes. Is there anything you want to add before I wrap this up?
No, I just want to thank you very much for covering this topic, which is indeed full of stigma. I mean, talking about alcohol addiction, rock bottom, and so on is not common for people to talk about. So the fact that we cover this here today, I hope that if there's some listeners who have something on their mind, that they do reach out. There's so many anonymous organizations there. And if they want to read my book, it's Executive Loneliness, and they can find it on Amazon.
Okay. And thank you. I mean, thank you for being vulnerable and opening up, because as we discussed, most men are not allowed to be vulnerable. And I applaud you that you were willing to be vulnerable here on the show, and actually to be honest with yourself, and to recreate a life that had meaning. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, though.
Thank you. So it's a pretty amazing story and a journey that, as he said, once we know our purpose, we can learn to help others. And it's part of the reason for the podcast, is I'm hoping that some of these stories actually inspire somebody else, and they can relate to it, and it opens up a door for them, that maybe they get help, or maybe they can find a way to help somebody else. I think when we look at our jobs, we have to put up a facade. We have to be that person that our boss thinks we are, or our employees think we are. We can't be who we truly are. We can't let those things happen and mess with our head. We have to show our strength, and our vulnerability cannot be seen. And that's kind of where things get toxic in the world, because we can't be honest that maybe this workload is not conducive for myself or my employees. And if you stand up for that, you may get backlashed. Or maybe this isn't the right fit for me. And to openly admit that maybe this job isn't for me is a tough thing, because especially for me, I mean, I rose from the ranks and I worked my tail off to get to where I was. But ultimately, my husband would sit there and tell me, because I was a super, not a supervisor, I was a claims supervisor, but I wasn't the office supervisor. And the fact is, my husband's like, oh, well, you could have your boss's job. And I would look at him and say, I don't want my boss's job. And that was the truth. I didn't, because I was struggling to deal with the stresses of this job. So there was no way I wanted another one. I didn't want anything higher, but I couldn't tell my boss that. I couldn't tell my boss the anxiety I was under, because I had to do what I had to do. They were depending on me. And because of that, I allowed my health to take the hit, because I actually went back to work with pneumonia once because of the fact that they needed me there. And what happened was it ended up putting me out longer because it came back. So, as one person told me, and this goes back to alcoholism and anything else you're going through while you're at work, no job is worth your health. Yes, you need the money to pay your bills. I understand that. But when it starts taking a personal hit on you and affects your health, no job is worth it. Nobody, you can always find something else to do. So, if you find yourself at a job that is soul sucking and you feel like you are losing it and that you're over medicating, whether it be through pharmaceuticals or through illegal pharmaceuticals or alcohol or even food, however you're trying to mask that, or mask or create an escape for you, as he said, stop and take stock. What really matters in your life? What is important in your life? And what is going wrong? And how do I fix this? Because once you do that, then you can ask for help. And that's very important, because once you see that something is toxic, you can finally walk away from it. But you have to be willing to face it. No matter if it's a great job or not, no matter how much you love the place you work or the people you're around, when you realize it's a toxic situation, you have to take care of you. So, on that note, now that I'm off the soapbox, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you want to be a guest on the show, please reach out to Donna, Dauna, at better2podcast.com. That's Donna at better2podcast.com. As I said, all the links for Nick's information and his book, it's on Amazon, are in the show notes as well. And our sound is done by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio. And I also apologize about Cammie barking. Cammie, the neighbor dog is barking and, she just has to respond. That's just, it's having a pet. So I apologize. But anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, day, weekend, whenever you're listening. And I'll catch you next time, guys. Bye. The Better 2 podcast is mixed, edited, and produced by Rich Zai of Third Ear Audio Productions.